Welcome back to Grumpy Vet Garage. I'm the Grumpy Vet Dino, and today we're back on my 2007 Chevy Silverado 2500 HD with an LBZ Duramax engine in it. The reason we're back on it is because the truck has about 340,000 miles, and over the last 10,000 miles, I've been fighting a little bit of a coolant issue with the vehicle. So after some deliberation looking into it, I've realized that it's about time for new head gaskets on this truck. So before jumping into it on this truck, I kind of want to go over like an overview of what you could look for if you're trying to troubleshoot head gaskets on your Duramax. So first thing with a head gasket, if you turn around and see oil in the coolant, so it looks like some sort of milkshake in your coolant system where oil is mixing with your coolant, it's a telltale sign that you have a head gasket leak. That's not what I had on my truck, but that would be a prime example. Truck kind of looking like a steam engine as you turn it on and it's just blowing white smoke. That's also a sign that you may be burning coolant. Coolant is somehow making it into the combustion chamber, and you're burning it off in the form of, a white smoke, like steam coming out of your exhaust pipe. Again, not what was happening on my truck. Overheating. If your truck's overheating and you don't understand why it's overheating, it very well, if you've already troubleshot thermostats and all the normal stuff that you would look at for an overheating engine, very well could be combustion heating or superheating your coolant and causing it to overheat and not function properly. You could be losing coolant that way. Especially on a diesel engine, the coolant tank turning black, that would be a sign that you're getting combustion gases into your coolant system. When you burn diesel, it can make soot, and that soot getting into your coolant system is how it turns black. Again, that's not what I was having happening here. Not overheating, and no black in the coolant tank. I got leaves falling out here. Overpressurization of the coolant system. This I did have. You turn off your Duramax. Now I have a forward-facing radiator hose on my setup, but how the radiator hose normally goes on a Duramax, where it comes from the center of the engine, or it comes back out of the thermostat housing to the center of the engine and then forward. If you grab that hose and that hose is rock solid, that could be a sign of overpressurization, especially if it stays rock solid long term. It's not the coolant system cooling down and the pressure relieving. It's pressure that's staying on that system. I've had that in the past before putting on this, putting on the forward-facing hose kit. So pressurization is definitely something I've had. Also, every time I pull off the radiator cap, it doesn't matter how long the truck is sat, I have pressure on it that wants to relieve and go overboard. So definitely what I was having. Unexplained coolant loss. This is another thing that my truck has had. So when I was still in the Air Force and I was driving this truck every single day to work, I might have a low coolant indication from the float that's in the overflow once a month. And I would top it off with half a quart, and it would go away. And I'd drive another month every single day, everywhere I went. And it was fine. It did that for years. I thought I probably had like a small leak somewhere that I wasn't seeing, maybe hitting a hot manifold and evaporating off, but I was never getting white smoke out of the tailpipe, so I knew I wasn't burning it. So I continued to drive it. But since I've retired from the Air Force and I drive the truck not as much as a daily anymore, I drive my Eclipse occasionally, actually pretty rarely, but I drive my Supra more than I drive my truck now. So it doesn't get that drive, but it really increased frequency that I was losing coolant, unexplained loss of coolant, to the point that the last time I went hunting, the trip from my house to my hunting club, the light would come on. I top it off. It was good. I had pressure on it. I would top it off. And by the time I got back home, it was on again. Probably a few weeks before that, it was a couple days where I would drive and then it would come on and I would fill it up and then again. So it was getting progressively worse, but unexplained coolant loss. So To try to determine what happened, what I did was do a head gasket test. You see these testers, and I have one right here. They look like this. And what you're going to do is warm up your engine and then fill this tube up to the fill line with a detection fluid. Now, a common thing people don't seem to understand is that not all detection fluid is the same. There is some, I believe, made by Block Tester. I don't know who makes that. That's probably not the real brand. They make a fluid that says it works with gasoline and with diesel. But Lyle's, and I'm probably pronouncing that tool company wrong, Lisle, their fluid is specific to gasoline and one to diesel. So this is the specific diesel one. It's a red fluid, and if there's combustion gases that enter into the system, it will turn from red to orange. I know the gas one, usually they're blue fluid, as I recall, and it'll turn from blue to yellow. So, but if it doesn't say specifically that it's for diesel, you need to assume it's for gasoline only, and then get a specific diesel exhaust fluid, or not exhaust fluid, testing fluid. So I did the tests, and I intended on showing you this test. It was a very long process, but I am going to show you the results, the pictures from me doing that test, where you could see how bright red the fluid was, and then after doing the test, how it turned orange. So let me show you those pictures now. So with seeing those results, having pressure to the point that it was pushing fluid coolant overboard, and I would have a constantly wet overflow from it over pressurizing and blowing over. I changed the radiator cap, by the way, so it's not what that is. But just losing fluid, it pushing over, I'm getting exhaust combustion gases in the coolant. It's a head gasket. What side it is, who knows? It's probably one and not the other, but there's no real point in just pulling one head and just hoping for the best. So I'm going to go ahead and do head gaskets on my LBZ. And while I'm in there, I'm going to do head studs, because why wouldn't you? So, but before jumping into that and showing you the things you need to take apart, I'm going to remove some of the things that everybody knows how to remove. I'm going to remove the air intake. I'm going to remove the hot side intercooler pipe. I'm going to remove the cold side intercooler pipe, so we can get down to the meat and potatoes, as it were, of changing head gaskets on an LBZ Duramax. This process is not going to be quick. So you're going to see probably early morning and late evening, I have another job that I do, so it's not going to happen immediately. So don't be surprised when you see the times change differently throughout this process. But here we go. But the first thing you need to do is drain the coolant. Now on my truck, I installed, moving down to the bottom, I installed right there a drain so that I can drain the coolant from the truck without having to pop off the lower radiator hose. But let me show you where you would go if you had to do it the way that GM, for whatever reason, had set it up to do. This right here is where you would disconnect. You would pull the clip out of this and pop this coupling back, and then you would drain the coolant right here, and it makes a mess, which is why I put in my own drain. But you're going to need to drain the coolant. You don't got to get it all out, because you're working on top of the engine. Stuff down in the lower part is going to be fine if it continues to have coolant in it. Because you're going to be disconnecting wiring, the next thing you're going to want to do is disconnect the batteries. So you're going to do negative and the negative on the other battery, then positives. If you disconnect one battery negative positive, you still have power and still have a ground to that system, so you have to do negatives on both batteries and then positives on both batteries. You're going to need to remove whatever intake system you have. So I have an S&B intake, so that tube has been removed. The turbo mouthpiece you need to pull off, which is I believe it's 8mm on a clamp to be pulled out. and then whatever your intake system is. In a previous video, I installed an SDP Screamin' Diesel Performance Y-Bridge kit, so I no longer have the EGR cooler and the EGR cooler up pipe. But to get to this point, you're going to need to remove all that. So I also removed my catch can system. So to my two breathers, that one's underneath the connectors, the ECU connectors, but remove that. I usually have mine right here. That needs to be out of the way. You will need to remove your hot side intercooler pipe. So that would be a clamp right here on the turbo. And let me come over to the wheel well. And then over here, it's a clamp that goes into, let me see if I can get it in there for you. Goes into the intercooler right there. When you disconnect it and you release it from the intercooler and release it from the turbo up top, the pipe is going to come out the top. Don't try to go out the bottom. It will snake its way out the top. There's enough room under the hood to get it out. The next thing that needs to happen is you need to remove the fan. So that starts with removing the fan shroud. So this has to come up first, which is all the little push clips. So use a trim panel retainer to pull those up. And then you can unbolt the shroud, move it out of the way. And then you can either use, there's one of two ways to remove it. I try to use, let me see if I can get it in there. You can see the big nut right there. They make a tool, a fan tool, that can turn around and unscrew that off. Let me see if I can get it in focus. They make a fan tool to unscrew that off. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't, an impact hammer is going to be your best bet. You're going to want to hit it counterclockwise like a standard fastener would unscrew off. And hitting it will loosen it up and it'll pull off. But that's the next thing to do, is to pull off the shroud and remove the fan and fan clutch. So to separate the top part of the shroud from the bottom, you're going to need to remove these two push clips. There's another two on the other side just like it. You need to remove those, and then this should pop free. Went ahead and pulled the TCM off of the fan shroud. My clips had gone bad as far as holding this to the fan shroud a long time ago, so I've been using bolts to hold it on, which is fine. But go ahead and disconnect this harness now and pull the TCM out of the way for safekeeping. So you don't want to take your serpentine belt off yet because you want to get this fan off. Your options are really this fan tool that I mentioned earlier, and I'll leave a link in the description for this kind of tool, or an air hammer. And I like it where it actually has like a punch so that it doesn't necessarily walk all over the place when you're hitting the surface. What you're going to do is you're going to reach in there with your tool on a breaker bar and try to spin it off. And I'll try that now off camera. If not, we're going to have to fire up the air compressor and use the air hammer. So the fan wrench would not get it off. I ended up having to use the air impact. And what you're going to want to do, I'm trying to get this on the... So what you're going to want to do is hit it on the edge of the nut, and it will push it over. You'll see it move. And once you get it to break loose, then you come back with your fan tool and spin it off. It actually was loose enough that I didn't need to use the fan tool. You can just spin it. You can see the nut. It's backing off now. Be careful, the fan is heavy and you don't want to just have it drop and smash into your radiator because of course radiators are expensive. Now utilize a 1/2-inch drive breaker bar and loosen up the tensioner and pull off the serpentine belt. So next we need to remove the accessories and brackets. So alternator needs to come out. Make sure if you disconnect anything that you label that connection, like I put painter's tape, wrote alternator on it, but remove the alternator, unbolt the air conditioner, and then you can fold it back over and stick it over near the firewall on the passenger side. And then power steering is kind of up to you how you want to do it. You can either disconnect the power steering pump from the bracket or leave it attached to the bracket and pull the whole thing off that way. I usually disconnect the power steering because it's a smaller unit to slide over, and then remove the large bracket. But it's really up to you. But we gotta have to get those brackets off the front of the engine so that we can get to the coolant crossover and then the bypass tube. Air conditioner disconnected and placed, like I said, folded over onto the passenger side, and then alternator removed. So the 2 bolts for the alternator and the 4 bolts for the AC compressor, all 15 millimeter. Here's the passenger side accessory bracket removed. You're going to need to remove the tensioner to be able to get the bolt out there, or at least make it easier for you to do so. Also, I removed the fan idler pulley. All the bolts holding this on are 14 millimeter, but now I'm going to work on the driver's side accessory bracket and remove the power steering pump from it and be able to slide it off front, just like this one was. Power steering pump's disconnected. It's 2 bolts right here, and then 3 bolts across the front that attach it to this bracket. Just to kind of secure it so it didn't get banged on, I went ahead and disconnected the 2 cam lock plugs down here for the ECU, removed it from its bracket, and then just kind of put it away for safekeeping. But now I need to work on getting this bracket off. But again, 15 millimeter, 5 total bolts to pull out the power steering pump. Driver's side accessory brackets removed, 2 bolts down here, and then 2 nuts on studs that go to the driver's side head. Now we need to remove the oil fill. Mine's a little bit different because of the forward-facing radiator hose, but need to remove oil fill, remove the coolant bypass. There's a hose here that needs to be disconnected, and then of course this part going down to the water pump, and then we can remove the actual coolant crossover, which connects to both cylinder heads. Coolant bypass and the coolant crossover is removed. You're going to have to remove the coolant pipe from the turbo to the crossover, and also the heater hose to the crossover. Mine's not exactly like it was stock, so it's a little bit different, but you have to disconnect those. And all of the bolts going to the water pump and for the crossover going to the engine block, or the cylinder heads, I should say, they're all 12 millimeter. Now that we have the brackets off the front of the cylinder heads, oil fill, everything's off the front, we need to start working the wiring back. So I've already started disconnecting some of the wires, like I said earlier, and labeling them, but we need to start disconnecting all of the wires. So sensors down at the bottom, there's a ground, and start working all of these off and pushed back over here. So I'm going to start doing that, and you just need to work on one side of the engine, disconnect it, label it, and work back towards the driver's side. Pretty much looks like a mess going on, but I got all the wiring off of this side. Something that I noticed when I was taking off the fuel injector plugs, you can depress the plug to release it, but sometimes it's just easier to take a flat blade screwdriver and get up underneath the clip to remove it, rather than trying to depress it and make that old plastic rock back. So there's something with that. But then also coming over here to the glow plug controller, this plug is a pretty standard, you squeeze it and you pull back, but this one, you actually have a tab underneath it right here that you pull back out that way, and then that will release that plug. It's almost like a cam lock, similar to the ECU, but instead of having a lever, it's got a pull tab right here that you pull, and it will slide it off of the controller. But also this controller has to come out too, so along with removing wiring, I'm going to go ahead and remove that glow plug controller. So I removed the glow plug controller, but the bracket that's there needs to be removed as well. And these fuel lines need to be disconnected because this stuff needs to come out of the way as well. So to get these disconnected, you use fuel line disconnects similar to these. You can find these at local auto parts stores. I'll also leave a link in the description where you can find these if you don't have them at your local auto parts store. But these have to be disconnected now so that we can get some of these lines out of the way, get this bracket off, and then continue to pull our wiring harness off the engine. All the wiring is laid over to the driver's side, and it is a bit of a mess. But now what we need to do is try to get these fuel manifolds off the top. So disconnect it to CP3, and I'm going to try to disconnect the CP3 and also disconnect at the rails. But I'm going to try to get this return with all these returns on the injectors. I'm going to try to get them to come off as one unit. So hopefully that'll work out. Granted, what I have going on over here is different. I have the return on the passenger side going to a fuel line back to the factory T. I removed a good portion of the fuel lines that were over here. It's a bit of a mess going one direction just to come back and then go back again. So I eliminated a lot of that, which does make priming difficult, but that's what I did. So I'm gonna try to remove all of the fuel lines as one unit, but be careful because there's little metal clips that you gotta pull off top of the injectors, and then there's a little nipple with a O-ring that is down into the injector that you got to be careful when you remove it, not to break it off. So you want to lift straight up after you remove the metal clip. So all the clips are removed off the top of the injectors and the return lines are pulled out. Now be patient with these. When you pull them out, you just want to get like a little twist and then pull. If it's making too much resistance, just take your time. You don't want to break the tip off into the injector. That could be a very expensive problem. But now that all those are done, as you come to the back, you see how the line comes around. So we're going to try to remove this whole thing out here as a unit. So we're going to disconnect this return right here, and then 10 millimeter on that clamp back there, 10 millimeter on this clamp, and then this should all come free because I already did the other side as well, the passenger side. So again, this looks different than factory, but oh yeah, and a clamp right here. And then this whole unit should come out. And then we can start working on breaking loose the actual injector lines. So I was able to get this fuel line out as a unit. So this is the part that goes into CP3. Here's with the pressure switch, the return from the driver's side rail, and then this is the return line. But yeah, I have it all intact. So now that that's removed, we can now go ahead and remove this line, this coolant line that goes to the turbo to get that out of the way, and then the CP3 line to the driver's side rail so that we could then start working on our favorite thing to work on, which is the Y bridge. And before I forget, there's actually two different sizes on these injector lines. So coming into the fronts here and also going down to the individual injectors, those are 17 millimeter. But all of these top fittings on the rail, those are 19 millimeter. So you're going to need a 17 millimeter flare nut wrench and a 19 millimeter flare nut wrench because they're on there really, really tight. So using an open end on them, you have a good chance of stripping them. So make sure you get a 17 and a 19 flare nut wrench. Okay, SCP Y bridge is removed. Okay, now moving up top, opportunity to go ahead and clean up, retrieve a nut that you dropped, and go ahead and remove all the injector lines. Make sure you label them so you know where they go. All 8 injector lines pulled and labeled. Labeled is very important so you're not trying to mismatch when it's time to put them back in. Now we need to go ahead and start taking up individual injector hold downs off as far as the bolts, and then try to pull these injectors out. There is an actual injector removal tool that you can get to help you remove these if yours is stuck. But what I found is using a more beefy trim tool, one that's got some real beef to it, not a thin one, but one that's pretty substantial. You can get up underneath the actual hold down for the injector and pop it up. Now to remove the bolt for the hold down, these are 12 millimeter right here. So you need to get those, and then you'll get up underneath the injector and then press up with your trim tool and it should pop out. Something else important to remember when we're removing the injector is when you pull it, let's see if I get it focused, you need to make sure that the copper washer, the sealing washer, is on the injector when you remove it. Yeah, fall is coming in, blowing leaves everywhere. But you need to make sure that the copper washer's there. And then once you remove this, there's a hold down pad. So it's like a little pressed in steel pad right here. You need to remove those. If you forget those and you take your valve cover off and flip it over, you'll throw this on the ground. So make sure to remove this every single time as well. Now we need to disconnect the up pipes on both sides. On the driver's side, you're going to work through the wheel well side and then also up from the bottom where the oil filter is. You can usually, like I remove the oil filter to actually get up in there to get the last bolt over there. But it's kind of the same thing on the passenger side. You can get these outside bolts pretty easy, but the inside one, the down pipe can get in the way. So what I did was loosen up my bracket holding my aftermarket downpipe to the bracket, and that gave me enough room to get a wrench in to disconnect the 12 millimeter 12 point that is there. So you can either remove it with the downpipe installed, or if you can't get the room, you're going to need to remove your downpipe, which is, of course, V-bands top and bottom, and then this bracket right there that connects it to the bracket on the back of the up pipe. Now we need to come back up top and remove the valve cover. You can either remove the upper then the lower. It just seems appropriate to just remove the whole thing together, and then you can separate it and change that gasket off of the truck. But it's held in place by 5 millimeter Allen screws. Make sure you clean out the screws before you try to actually loosen them up. Like that one right there on my truck is just packed full of stuff. So I'm going to use a, well, I could use a screwdriver, but I'm going to end up using a punch like this, or like an ice pick, to clean that out before removing it. But yeah, we need to remove both valve covers so we can access the valve train. And while we're doing that, we should also go ahead and remove this ground strap or disconnect it so we don't forget about it later when we pull the heads off. So valve covers are off, and the ground strap for the head is disconnected. I ended up taking the upper valve cover off on the driver's side just because of the lack of room over here. I probably could have forced it out, but I just figured it was easy to go ahead and take it off, so I did. But yeah, off on both sides. Now what we need to do is remove the rocker pedestal. So it's going to be 5 bolts that need to be taken off. And what you're going to want to do is slowly back them off. So break them loose, moving from the inside out, and then do quarter turns or half turns, whatever you feel is appropriate. But what you're trying not to do is let this spring tension put too much stress on the rockers, because you don't want to break your assembly. This is a very expensive part. So now we need to go ahead and remove the rockers. So the rocker pedestal is removed. Before I forget, you also need to make sure that you still have the dowel pins on the head. These locate the valve cover gasket and also the valve cover, one here and then one on the back. And then there's 2 dowels, one here and one there for the actual pedestal. So make sure you still have those. You don't want to lose those. Now we need to go ahead and pull the push rods and the bridges. Push rods and rocker bridges are removed. Now we need to go ahead and actually remove the cylinder head. We're going to need to do that by removing the Allen head bolts that go across the top. Those are 6 millimeter Allens. And then we need to remove all of the head bolts, and those are 17 millimeter 12 points. Now, I'm going to put in the video a picture of the torque sequence for when you actually are torquing it down. You're going to need to do that in the opposite direction. So working from the outside in rather than when you're torquing it from the inside out. So I have all the head bolts loosened up. Again, working outside to the inside. And I already got the passenger side head removed. But you need to remember that when you lift the head, you're going to be looking for dowel pins. There's going to be 2 underneath that head. You're going to need to make sure to retrieve those. And then this back bolt right here will not come out. So when you remove the head, it's going to have to stay with the head. So what I'm going to do is just either put a piece of tape or a zip tie just to kind of lift it up so that it doesn't scratch the surface when I pull the head off. But additionally, at the beginning I said that you're going to need to use a 17 millimeter 12 point, and that's true, but you're going to need a shallow one to be able to get those back ones. So I would suggest if you're getting a socket to make sure to get a 12.17 shallow socket. So the driver's side head is removed. It's actually the next day. Looking at this head or this block and also looking at the head gasket, it appears as though the leak was most likely at the back of the cylinder, which somewhat makes sense. The factory bolts are torque to yield, so it's a torque setting and then an angle. If they didn't have the proper tooling to get in there, because it looks like this may be the second time these head gaskets have been changed. If they didn't have the proper tooling to get in there, they may not have been able to torque that back bolt appropriately So that would have given uneven clamping load and then potentially caused the problem. Now, it may have lasted 100,000 miles or so, but it appears to be that's where it is. I'm going to take a tighter picture of that area and then also that corresponding spot on the head gasket to show you, but that appears to be where the problem lied. Okay, there is the passenger side head, still with the intake plenum, fuel rail, and exhaust manifold installed. And then here is the driver's side, same configuration, still got the ground strap on it. But now what we need to do is break down this head and install it onto our new head. Now, you necessarily, if you're going to get your heads machined, you won't need to worry about that. Well, you will need to worry about that. You're still going to need to break it down before you take it to your machinist to have them look at it. But glow plugs need to be pulled. Of course, the manifold needs to be pulled. You're also going to need to pull the dowels for the rockers and then also the dowels for the valve cover off. But I'm not reusing these heads. In my local area, I didn't really find anybody that was like, ooh, yeah, we do that and we take care of that kind of work. They're like, well, we ship it off. It's going to cost this. So I was decided to go ahead and not do that. So what I ended up doing was getting a head, well, heads from Fleece Performance. Let me go ahead and open the box real quick so you can see what I got. They package it very nicely. But this is their heads. Valves are done. Everything is ready to go. It's been pressure tested, so this is a good head. But I need to move everything over that I'm going to reuse from the old heads to the new heads. So you're going to get a driver's side and a passenger side. And they label that. They list that when you order them, but that's what I ended up getting. Additionally, at the beginning of the video, I talked about that I was going to go ahead and stud the head. So this is a set of head studs from Dirty Hooker Diesel. Very comparable to the standard ARP head stud, and I'm fine with that. I also went with Merchant Automotive. They make kits that are ARP fasteners, but specifically for our engine. So if you go to ARP and say, I want to get rocker shaft bolts for the head, they don't sell those, but Merchant has made kits with all of the correct size bolts to do that job. Same thing with the exhaust manifold. And this is the exhaust manifold to the head. And then this is exhaust manifold to the up pipes. They make those kits. So they do exist. They just made them custom for you rather than you trying to figure out from ARP what to get. And then lastly, I don't really like Allen head bolts for the valve cover. Easily stripped. They get full of trash. These are 12-point stainless valve cover bolts that I'm going to put on the engine. It also is kind of pretty. So yeah, that's also pretty nice. But this is what I'm going to use. So a fleece head and then this hardware. So everything's tore down and removed. Heads are off. Next is going to be all of the prep to get everything installed. I didn't want to make the video too long, so this video is just going to be everything getting tore down, and then I showed you the Fleece Performance heads and the fasteners I'm going to use to put it back together. I make videos because I want them to be informational. I think those are the videos that historically on YouTube has helped me. I like to see the actual what did you use and how did you do it. Now, granted, I'm doing more of a stop frame type thing because it's difficult to record and do those things. But I hope the information for removal is going to help somebody who's needing to do head gaskets on their LBZ. But the next video is going to be getting the heads ready to go back on, and then also prepping the block surface for receiving new heads. But I hope this kind of content has helped somebody, and if so, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'm trying to do more technical videos for my LBZ Duramax, my Supra, try to get back onto the Eclipse. But again, if you like these kind of videos, please consider subscribing to my channel, sharing these videos, liking these videos. Also, we have a merch store. This is a Grumpy Vet Garage zip-up hoodie. We have pullover hoodies, also t-shirts. Link to that store is in the description. Buy something for yourself. It really helps out the channel. But until the next video on these head gaskets, thanks for coming and seeing me in my garage, and have a good one.